Sometime in the late 2300s, scientists managed to create a clock with a complex algorithm in it that could tell a wearer when they would die. Most societies wrote it off as just predictive, believing it was simply reading the wearer's blood pressure, registering their intake and health, as well as other factors, and making a calculated guess and estimate of how long they had left. Even so, it quickly became a popular trend and everyone brought one just for the fun of it, or because they wanted to be part of a popular fad. Some of those who wore the watches had what became known as their 0 hour within a year, some within a few months. Many who had their 0 hour within a few months made jokes about it, not believing it to be accurate. Only a very small section of those who wore the watches actually took it seriously. However, every single one of them, without exception, took their final breaths the second the watch hit 0. The vast majority of them dying in manners that could not have been calculated. One man died when a distracted driver ran a red light and hit him. Another actually did get struck by lightning. Someone else died when a bird flew too close to them as they were walking upstairs. They panicked and fell down backwards. 53 people, all who ended up working in the same building at the same time, who when they first put on their clock weren't all working together, all had their 0 hour within a few hours of each other. On that day, an earthquake hit. All those marked to die that day died, and all those who worked there but didn't have a 0 hour that day survived. Collectively, society really tried to shrug it off. It was just a coincidence, a really clever algorithm registering the tectonic plates and movements for the world to calculate the probability of an earthquake, paired with those who worked in the office doing the same routine every day. The watch could simply calculate the predictive location based on the GPS tracker in the watch of where each of them would be standing based on their repeated movements which each of them took in the past. Then, if the watch believed there was going to be an earthquake, it could calculate the likelihood of the building collapsing, how it would collapse, and who would be standing where when it did. That way the watch could accurately hypothesize and calculate the likelihood of someone dying in a collapse earthquake. Yeah, that makes sense. However, the watch predicted their 0 hour the second they put it on, before it had a chance to gather enough data for calculations. People even tried swapping out their watches with someone else, but the second it touched their flesh, it would show their 0 hour. As soon as it was put back on the other person though, it would change back to their 0 hour. Technically, these weren't even watches. They were just computers built into the shape of a device someone could wear on their wrist. As long as it was touching living human material, it could tell you how long they had left. They could have been made any shape or size. It could have been a hat, could have been a headband, could have been a collar, it even could have been a belt. Provided they could actually get the computer into the shape and still work, it could have even been a ring. Regardless, within a decade, society could no longer deny it. The watches were never wrong. Every single person who wore one died when the clock hit 0. Of course, there were many people who tried to avoid their 0 hour. However, in every case, by trying to avoid their 0 hour, they ended up causing it. Some tried to defy their 0 hour and kill themselves before their time was up. Most of those who tried this had days, maybe a month, but some had years, even decades remaining. Despite this, all who tried survived, either because it was unsuccessful or because of just random happenstance their tools happened to malfunction. Some were left with lifelong scars, some were paralysed. Some should have died but survived from what could only be called luck or a miracle. Others ended up in comas, only dying when their 0 hour hit 0. But none of them died before their watch decreed. There were even studies done where people's 0 hours were recorded but they weren't allowed to know them. The results were the same. Even when they didn't know, they still died at the exact moment the watch foretold. Within a decade, all of society began revolving around the watch, commonly becoming known as death clocks, or DCs for short. The algorithm had even become smart enough to tell the wearer how they would die. Heart attack, hit by a train, aneurysm, stabbing, drowned, struck by lightning, stray javelin. It was impossible to predict, but the watch was always right. Health insurance companies made it a requirement to wear a DC when getting evaluated. Once someone turned 18, you were required to record your death day. Those who only had a few years left were looked down on by society. If you had less than 5 years left, very few companies would hire you. If you had less than a year, you were more or less seen as worthless to the world. However, in the late 2470s, a concerning pattern began appearing. A higher than average DCs started stating 0 hours within July 2523. July 9th and the days leading up to it, to be specific. On top of that, the watch didn't specify what they would die of. Instead, it would just be blank, or say something along the lines of unknown, incalculable. As the years passed by, billions of DCs all over the world predicted a 0 hour on July 9th, 2523. Unfortunately, a far more scary pattern was beginning to emerge. Not a single person's DC predicted them living beyond July 9th, 2523. By the year 2500, it had become law that newborns get clocked as soon as they're born. Not a single one of them showed a date beyond July 9th, 2523. But once again, a pattern became visible. Humanity's 0 hour could almost be measured as a pulse, beginning in the New Mexico desert, emanating outwards within an 11-minute window between 2:31 PM and 2:42 PM on July 9th. The entire Earth's watches hit 0. By the year 2513, society had all but crumbled. Some went to the New Mexico desert to see if they could find answers. A few years earlier, leaders around the world agreed to bomb the entire desert off the map. However, many argued that in doing so, they'd be the one causing humanity's death. The date is July 9th, 2523. 12 minutes ago, the first of the DCs hit 0. Now every DC says 0. Despite this, apart from those who killed themselves, everyone else was still alive. Nothing had happened. Or rather, as far as humanity could tell, nothing had happened. This is where your story begins.